Welcome to What's America Thinking. I'm Julia Manchester. This week, we're talking about something that most Americans drink every single day, bottled water. But according to a new study, researchers from Columbia University have found that plastic bottles of water can contain thousands of harmful nanoplastics, particles so small they can enter your body's cells. Despite all the concerns, the industry is booming. In fact, it's one of the fastest growing industries in the world, with more than 1 million bottles of water sold every single minute in the US alone. That's 50 billion bottles of water every year in the country. And that number is expected to double by 2030. So, bottled or tap, we hit the streets to find out how you're getting your daily dose of H2O.
I know personally at home, we spend a great deal of money on special filtration systems for even our tap water or anything else, because it's important to us that we get the good kind of water that you want to be putting in your bodies.
If I'm here in the U.S., tap. It's cheaper.
Bottled water, but I live in Mexico, so that's really the only way you're going to get drinking water. Well, I think there's a bigger issue on access to clean water. I don't think for me there I would, but when I'm home, I'm from Missouri, and so when I'm home I don't tend to use plastic bottles, but I think it's really hard when you're traveling. So I think it's interesting to think about, but I don't know if there's a real solution that would be a quick fix.
Probably cost. That's really the only thing. But in the day-to-day, life just goes by and you do what's convenient and what works for your budget is kind of the reality there.
Here to break it all down for us is Matt Campen, a professor at the University of New Mexico College of Pharmacy. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today.
Julia, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so just to get started, can you tell us about this new research on nanoplastics in water bottles? What did researchers at Columbia University discover?
Well, the big impact of their study was the development of new technology that allows you to see and characterize the types of plastics that are these very, very small shapes. Yeah, you see there on the screen these little tiny dots that can be magnified and imaged. And then they applied that technology, they call it stimulated Raman spectroscopy. They applied that to bottled water and showed really an alarming number of microplastics. I think we knew that these, I should say nanoplastics, even smaller than micro, we knew they were there. We didn't have a good technology to tell us how much was there.
So on that issue of nano and microplastics, can you tell us the difference, us lay people, the difference between micro and nanoplastics?
Absolutely. It's the same material. The nano is just smaller. The micro is micrometer. So you go centimeter, millimeter, down to micrometer, and then nanometer size is 1,000-fold smaller. And ultimately, when you break down these little plastic products that we use all the time, as they degrade, they become smaller and smaller and smaller, but they never change. They don't become some other chemical. They just get smaller, and now they're everywhere.
Yeah, and that's, I think, what's so concerning for many of us reading over this new study. And a lot of that concerns comes from the serious, health risks or health concerns involved in nanoplastic. Tell us some of those concerns and, what nanoplastics might be causing.
It's a little premature to say there's absolutely health effects. There are some hints that there are problems. In my group published today that there are a lot more in placentas of the human body than we previously thought. Is that aligning with birth outcomes? We don't know that yet. We know that there's particles in your brain, there's particles in your heart. Whether that causes the problem or not is not clearly shown yet, but here's the problem. The plastics in the environment are exponentially increasing. Every 10 to 15 years, the amount that's there is doubling in the environment. And so that's probably going to double in our bodies is about the same rate. And there's a fundamental tenet in my field of science of toxicology that is dose makes the poison.
Wow. So nanoplastics are not just found in water bottles. Where else are they hiding?
They're everywhere. I think almost a decade ago, people found it in Svalbard, which is an island north of Norway. The plastics have gotten everywhere. I think they're in every major waterway, every major ocean. This study looked specifically at bottled water, which we think of as being very clean. I think it would have been very healthy for them to compare it to tap water, to pull something out of the Hudson as long as they're hanging out at Columbia University, and give us a better, demonstration of the breadth or the diversity of plastics that exists throughout our planet at this point. But I'm sure that with this new technology, that's what they're going to do, and we look forward to seeing those results.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see what they find. Some experts have said plastic is, quote, toxic from birth. Can you explain what that term means?
It's an interesting perspective, and I think they mean it's toxic from the birth of the plastic. And that means that, when you take fossil fuels and you refine it, there is exhaust coming from those petroleum refineries. And we have Cancer Alley down in Louisiana. The transport and spillage of this stuff gets everywhere. And then there are plasticizers, there are chemicals that are built in to the plastics as they are created in different polymer shapes and sizes and things like that. And so those things, they're chemicals like phthalates, bisphenols, and we know that those can, at certain concentrations, also be toxic. And then now we see they degrade and they don't go away. They just become smaller and scatter everywhere. So we are worried about the health effects. These are plastics we thought would be the solution to so much of life's problems. And in many ways they are, because food industry is clearly improved, medical, the practice of medicine is improved with plastics. But now we have a conundrum because we didn't anticipate this long-term problem.
So this is certainly a long-term problem, or it seems like it to readers of this research when it comes to the health concerns, and we already went through those, but there's other issues like sustainability and environmental impact. Talk to us about those issues.
Well, these micro and nanoplastics, they come from plastics that have been on our planet for 40, 50 years. We worry about the fresh new plastics that are maybe in cosmetic products or your microfleece sweater that you just bought for Christmas. That is a part of the problem, but most of what we're worried about is the billions of tons. There is literally a ton of plastic waste for every human on this planet. And as that degrades over the next decade, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, it's contributing steadily and in a worsening manner. So sustainability is absolutely the problem. And what are we going to do to replace these materials? We can't just abandon them all at once. We're going to have to find some practical way to transition to something that's either more biodegradable, more biocompatible, or just something that we can better recycle and reutilize so it doesn't build up like plastics are doing.
Well, I didn't even know, you just brought this up, that these microplastics or nanoplastics are found in cosmetic materials and even clothing. It seems like it's impossible to get away from this. So how can Americans and people around the world stay safe going forward?
I will give credit to the cosmetics industry. They've identified this as maybe a thing they don't need and a worry that they have as well. So I've seen a lot of cosmetic companies pull back and say, we're not going to use it. And I applaud them for that. I hope other companies follow suit, because it is going to be really hard for a global problem to be addressed when there's such a ubiquity of the products. And where do we go from here? This is global commerce demands plastics. You see these islands in the ocean of plastics because of the spillage and waste products. We need dramatic global cooperation, which is not something we've been good at lately. And I think we need to be aware that humans individually, we do have a sort of role as a citizen to be responsible about recycling. But at the end of the day, the infrastructure needs to exist to make that efficient and practical. And that might not be doable. So we need to come up with other solutions of what we can do with these plastics that doesn't just leave them rotting in the ground.
And to bring this full circle, we started with drinking water. So how can Americans stay safe? Do they just avoid bottled water altogether, or as much as they can? I mean, you see, reusable water bottles, oftentimes made of metal. I mean, is that a good path forward?
Yeah, I mean, and that comes back to that responsible citizen piece. If you want to be somebody who pays attention, does the right thing, absolutely get rid of the bottled water, use a reusable container. That's great. But there's a bigger picture, and it's not just water bottles that are contributing to these things. The stuff we ingest is going to be in our food. It's coming from agricultural products across the board. We get it from crops. We get it from probably the meats that we eat. So how to protect yourself? Honestly, the best hunch we have is that plastics get into our body through fats. And that might be an extrapolation. I don't know that there's a lot of evidence out there, but having a healthy diet is probably going to be your best bet.
It's very good to know. And, Matthew Campen, thank you so much for breaking it all down for us. This is such an issue we really don't talk about enough. So thanks for, raising awareness about it.
Absolutely. Thank you for covering this and having me on, Julia.
Thank you. In a massive blow to the House GOP last year, George Santos was expelled after being hit with a slew of federal charges. His controversial exit left an open seat that Democrats were ready to take. After pouring $13 million into the New York special election, Democrats came out on top.
Despite the dirty tricks, despite the vaunted Nassau County Republican machine, we won.
Now, the race had many implications for the House, shifting the balance of power to the Democrats, now with the 213 seats to the GOP's 219. Both parties used the special election to test how voters reacted to their border messaging and foreign funding going into the presidential election. It's time to go on the record with Scott Tranter, Director of Data Science from Decision Desk HQ. Scott, thanks for joining us from a chilly D.C. Rooftop this time.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
Well, Scott, just to start off, Democrats obviously scored this major victory in New York, a huge blow to House Republicans. Mike Johnson says this is in no way a bellwether in the election. Is he right?
Well, it's interesting. I would say he's partially right. Special elections do not necessarily pretend what's going to happen in the general election. But this is a tough one. This is a seat that the Republicans took from the Democrats 2 years ago. It's a Biden +7 district. Tom Suozzi outperformed the polling. The polling indicated Suozzi was only up 3 to 4, so we thought we were expecting a little closer race. It looks like he's going to win by 7. It does tell us a lot about campaign tactics going into the fall. Republicans tend to vote on Election Day, which is different from the trend over the last 10 years. And because of the snowstorm, we saw a depressed turnout on Election Day, and that certainly hurt Mazi Pilip. And so that's going to be something we look at, going into this fall. Are there big, weather instances or weather things going on in key states like Pennsylvania, Ohio? That's kind of what we learned from this one.
Moving on, the special counsel's report on President Biden's handling of classified documents didn't paint a pretty picture of his mental fitness. Instead, it called into question his recollection of key moments, including the years he was vice president. Now, a new poll shows a majority of Americans think both Biden and Trump are too old to serve. What effect could this have on voter turnout, and does it increase the chances of a third-party bid?
Well, I think what this does is it confirms what a lot of voters' priors are. Their priors are that both candidates are too old, just as the graphic you showed, but it also confirms what a lot of the polling has said about both candidates is they want somebody else, right? So that's what this special counsel's report does. It confirms what everyone's been thinking. It does have an effect on third party, right? Because the average voter doesn't spend a whole lot of time looking and reading and talking about all this. And so if their initial reaction is, hey, my candidate, whether it's Republican or Democrat's too old, let me go and see who else is out there. And so that's where I think you see a no labels, or an RFK Jr. or a Cornel West, at least looking to latch on and potentially make some noise coming this fall.
So going back to Biden and Trump, what are voters more concerned about, a candidate's age or their mental acuity?
So it's interesting. We've been polling, all the pollsters, including, News Nation, The Hill, have been polling age. There isn't a whole lot on a mental acuity, but I would imagine a lot of the voters look at mental acuity and age as the same thing. They're highly correlated. We're going to see some more polling about that, especially after President Biden very publicly opted not to take a cognitive test in his upcoming health physical, something Donald Trump did. That's certainly not going to help the news cycle. And so I think we're going to see some more polling on mental acuity. But what I do think is a lot of voters are going to look at mental acuity the same way they look at his age. Is, if I think you're too old, then I also think, if you can't appear to be with it or be sharp or be on top of things, we're gonna dock that against you.
So Vice President Kamala Harris's favorability is 40%. She's a heartbeat away from the presidency. Do you think voters see her as an asset or a liability to Biden's reelection bid?
So that's interesting. If we just look at her favorability, right? Democrats support her because she's a Democrat, but not necessarily because they love her as a candidate or a leader. Republicans hate her just on the fact that she's a Democrat. So it's really those independent voters, and that's where her favorability among independents isn't good. Depending on the poll, she's anywhere from upside down in terms of, more unfavorables to right on the edge, 50-50. So, that's different than from a lot of vice presidents in the past. That is where she's going to have to make it up if she's going to take more of a leadership role, and that's not a good thing going into the general for them. You want to see someone like her viewed favorably, certainly among the independents. You're not going to win over the Republicans, and you've got the Democrats in the bag, but she's going to have to do something about those independent voters who've had 3 to 4 years to look at her and make a judgment and, don't necessarily love her.
I want to talk about the economy now. CPI data suggests that inflation is coming down, but a recent poll shows voters trust Trump more than Biden when it comes to the economy. So what does it say? What does the data say about why Bidenomics is not resonating with voters?
Well, it's interesting. We talk about this a lot, and I think we're going to talk about it pretty much for the next 9 months. All the economic data says the economy is getting better. But you know what most voters are seeing? They're seeing tens of thousands of layoffs in white-collar jobs on the tech sector. Their consumer sentiment is upside down. They don't think the economy is on the right track. It's funny. If we just look anecdotally, my favorite thing is tracking the dollar menu. Both McDonald's and Taco Bell basically said, we're going to retool that because we understand people don't like paying $20 for meals. And I think that's really where the problem is you've got all these economics professors and all these bigwig finance people telling the people that the economy's good, but they're sitting here saying, look, stuff's too expensive, gas is too expensive, et cetera. And that plays directly into what Trump is going to do. Trump is going to say, hey, the economy was good under me. Not going to be real specific about it, but they're going to say, hey, he's going to say, hey, it was good under me. So it's bad under Biden. So if you bring me back, I'm going to make it better. Whether that's true or not is a different question, but that's the message that's going to resonate. And we can see that in the polling. We can see that by voters saying, yeah, we trust Donald Trump. The economy was better under you, or at least we perceived it to be better. And so that's what we're seeing in the polling.
That's a good point you bring up about the dollar menu. It's been a few years or a while since I've seen fast food chains advertise that. Very interesting. Moving on, in a three-way matchup, Decision Desk has Robert F. Kennedy Jr. snagging 8% of the vote as he continues to fight for ballot access. Do you think RFK Jr. helps or hurts Biden?
Look, this initial average, and we're going to start tracking this, and we're going to start tracking it at the state level because that's where it really matters. It appears that he's pulling more from Joe Biden, and that's logical, especially at this stage, just because he's got a lot of name ID in the Democratic Party, and so initially, everyone before they get into him and look at some of his policy positions and look at what he's saying, like, okay, Kennedy seems okay, seems new. Especially when you combine it with the fact that poll that you showed earlier that the majority of Democrats think Joe Biden's too old. This makes sense. When we get down to it and we start looking at the state level stuff in a couple of months, I think we're going to see that RFK has some positions that's going to allow him to take some voters from Donald Trump as well. He's definitely positioned to be a spoiler if, and that's a big if, he can get on the ballot in states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Florida.
Yeah, and that's interesting because we've heard Trump really up his rhetoric against RFK. The RNC certainly isn't happy with RFK, or they've at least expressed that. I know you said you're going to dig into the state level going forward, but where do you think RFK Jr. could help Trump? I know you mentioned Pennsylvania, but what are some of the other places?
I think Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin are the three states to look at just simply based on RFK. Some of RFK's policy positions are populist and libertarian leaning and appeal to some of the more blue collar voters, especially on the union side, and some on the the fringe vaccine, get the government out of my school type area. Obviously, that would hurt Trump a little bit too, but those are the types of voters that generally the Democrats have counted on in their coalition to win in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania.
On a lighter note, do you think Biden is trying to downplay his age by launching a TikTok account? I know he did that on Super Bowl Sunday and made some headlines.
Yeah, no, the TikTok campaign and the tweet about with him in the red eyes after the Kansas City Chiefs win, he's certainly trying to go after that Gen Z voter. What's interesting to me, we're going to see some polling, is if that resonates, right? One thing we've learned about polling Gen Z is they are different from millennials, which I am, or Gen X, which some other people are, is they can smell inauthenticity. And, that message didn't speak to me, but I'm not sure it spoke to them. And we'll see if any of this stuff works, especially when, there's a lot of national security and issues around TikTok and things like that. We'll see if the Republicans pounce on that and try and, every voter they lose on the youth side, they pick one up in the 55 plus side. And that's a big issue among people who vote at a higher rate than those younger people. So it's an interesting strategy. We'll see if it pays off.
Yeah, it's all about meeting voters where they are, but Biden getting some bipartisan pushback against that TikTok account. Very interesting. Scott Tranter, as always, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Moving on to Trump's legal troubles, a recent News Nation Decision Desk HQ survey found 57% support disqualifying Trump from the ballot if he is convicted in one or more of his criminal cases. Unsurprisingly, this breaks along partisan lines, with only 29% of Republicans supporting his disqualification compared to 85% of Democrats. With so much at stake, it's no wonder the former president is sparing no cost on his defense. The Hill staff writer Rafael Bernal breaks down the numbers on Trump's legal fees, and the cost is colossal.
So we all know former President Donald Trump is facing 91 criminal charges spread across 4 indictments and a handful of civil lawsuits. The courts are still far from determining whether Mr. Trump is in fact a criminal. But for his lawyers, they're getting paid. Our colleague Zach Schoenfeld and Ella Lee broke down how much each law firm collected in 2023. Florida attorney Chris Kais netted almost $9 million defending Trump. He's the lead trial lawyer on New York Attorney General Letitia James's civil fraud lawsuit against Trump and his businesses, by far the most expensive and financially riskiest of Trump's trials. Coming in second, Clifford Robert at $5.29 million. Robert is also on the New York lawsuit team, mainly defending Trump's adult sons and other parties in the case. Trump has paid California attorney Harmeet Dillon's firm $4.61 million. Dillon's defended Trump against attempts to knock him off the ballot using the 14th Amendment's insurrection ban and in the Stormy Daniels defamation lawsuit. Alina Haba, a lawyer who's almost become a household name, charged $4.03 million through her firm in Trump-related cases. If it seems like Haba is in every courtroom the former president visits, it's because she pretty much is. She's Trump's legal spokeswoman as well as an attorney on an array of cases. So lawyers John Lauro and his associates charged $2.65 million as part of Trump's defense, this time against the federal charges related to January 6th. Defending accusations that Trump allegedly mishandled classified documents has netted Evan Corcoran's firm $2.63 million. But Corcoran probably won't make the 2024 list. He stepped down as Trump's attorney in that case after allegations that Trump misled Corcoran. And then attorney Todd Blanche, he's defending Trump on a variety of criminal cases to the tune of $2.33 million. Blanche left his old law firm to represent Trump, but not before the firm charged $345,000 for related services. And New York trial lawyer Joe Tacopina is another one who won't be on the 2024 books. His firm, though, charged $1.77 million defending Trump in the lawsuit brought against him by writer E. Jean Carroll. And finally, Atlanta defense lawyer Steve Sadow charged $1.52 million after Trump hired him shortly before surrendering to Fulton County authorities in August. Well, you may be asking yourself, how do we know this? Easy. Those payments were all made through political groups, PACs and super PACs and campaigns that have to publicly disclose their spending. And that $34 million figure, well, if you add the odds and ends these groups have spent on Trump's defense, the total adds up closer to $50 million.
That's it for What's America Thinking. Come back next week. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel. And we want to hear from you. Leave your comments and let us know what's on your mind.